In the summer of 1914, Europe did not look like a continent waiting for disaster. Its capitals were filled with music, newspapers, royal ceremonies, factories, trains, and confident speeches about progress. Kings still ruled from ancient palaces. Empires stretched across oceans. Politicians spoke of honor, security, and civilization. To many, Europe seemed powerful, modern, and almost untouchable. But beneath that polished surface, something far darker was waiting. In only a few weeks, one assassination in the streets of Sarajevo would set off a chain reaction no leader could fully control. Armies would mobilize. Alliances would awaken. Old rivalries would harden into declarations of war, and soon millions of men would be dragged into trenches, facing machine guns, poison gas, artillery, mud, hunger, and death on a scale the world had never seen. But World War I did not begin because of one bullet alone. That bullet was only the spark. The real reason was hidden in decades of fear, ambition, nationalism, empire, and military planning. Europe had built a machine for war, and in 1914, that machine finally started moving. Before the first shots were fired, Europe stood at the height of its confidence. Its cities glowed with electric lights. Railways stitched nations together. Newspapers carried stories of invention, industry, science, and empire. From London to Berlin, from Paris to Vienna, the ruling classes believed they were living in the most advanced age humanity had ever known. Europe was not only powerful, it saw itself as the center of civilization. But power can hide weakness. Behind the parades, palaces, and polished uniforms, every great empire carried a private fear. Britain ruled the seas and possessed the largest empire in the world, but it worried that its dominance could not last forever. Germany, newly unified and rapidly industrializing, wanted recognition equal to its strength. France still carried the humiliation of losing Alsace-Lorraine to Germany in 1871, a wound that never fully healed. Russia was enormous, but slow, unstable, and desperate to prove itself as protector of the Slavic peoples. Austria-Hungary was old, complicated, and fragile, ruling over many ethnic groups who no longer wanted to obey Vienna. And the Ottoman Empire, once feared across continents, was now fading, losing territory and influence piece by piece. Europe looked orderly on a map, but those borders were filled with pressure. Each empire believed it was surrounded by danger. Germany feared being trapped between France in the west and Russia in the east. France feared another German invasion. Britain feared any power that could challenge its navy or dominate the continent. Russia feared humiliation in the Balkans and the loss of its status as a great power. Austria-Hungary feared collapse from within, especially if nationalism spread among its Slavic subjects. Every nation claimed it wanted peace, yet every nation prepared for the possibility that peace might suddenly disappear. This was the contradiction at the heart of Europe before the war. It was wealthy, educated, industrial, and proud. Yet it was also nervous, suspicious, and heavily armed. Progress had not removed fear. In many ways, progress had made fear more dangerous. Factories could produce weapons faster than ever before. Railways could move armies to borders in days. Telegraphs allowed governments to send orders instantly. Modern technology promised a better future, but it also made destruction more organized, more efficient, and more terrifying. The rulers of Europe were also connected by family. Kings, queens, emperors, and princes often called one another cousins. They attended weddings, funerals, and royal ceremonies together. On the surface, this made war between them seem almost unthinkable. But blood ties did not erase national rivalries. Family relationships could not control armies, newspapers, military plans, or public pressure. When crisis came, royal cousinship would prove far weaker than pride, fear, and political survival. Ordinary people also lived inside this atmosphere of tension. Many were proud of their nations and believed their country had a special destiny. Newspapers fed them stories of enemy threats, heroic soldiers, and national honor. School books taught glorious histories. Military uniforms became symbols of respect. In cafés, universities, barracks, and government offices, war was often imagined not as industrial slaughter, but as a test of courage, masculinity, and national strength. Few truly understood what modern weapons would do once millions of men were placed before them. Even diplomacy had become a kind of performance. Leaders spoke carefully in public, but privately, they measured every gesture as strength or weakness. A concession could look like surrender. A delay could look like fear. In such a world, pride often moved faster than wisdom. And so, Europe entered 1914 like a room filled with gas. Nothing had exploded yet. So many assumed the danger was under control. Diplomats still held meetings. Monarchs still sent polite messages. Tourists still traveled. Markets still opened. Life continued with the illusion of normality. But the danger was not that Europe was weak. The danger was that every power believed it had too much to lose. Every empire feared decline. Every government feared appearing weak. Every army had plans waiting in drawers. And every rivalry had been sharpened by years of suspicion. All that was missing was a spark, and that spark would come from a region where empire and nationalism were already locked in a deadly struggle. The spark that would ignite Europe did not come from nowhere. It came from the Balkans, a region where old empires, young nations, and wounded pride collided more dangerously than anywhere else on the continent. To understand why Sarajevo mattered so much, we must understand the force that made a local assassination feel like a struggle for survival. Nationalism. Nationalism was one of the most powerful ideas of the modern age. It told people that they were not merely subjects of a king or emperor. They were members of a nation, bound together by language, culture, history, religion, blood, and memory. To many ordinary people, nationalism felt like awakening. It gave them pride. It gave them identity. It told them their people had a destiny. But to empires, nationalism was terrifying. The great empires of Europe were not simple nations. They were giant collections of different peoples. Austria-Hungary ruled over Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Slovenes, Poles, Italians, Romanians, Bosnians, and Serbs. Many of these groups had their own languages, traditions, and dreams. Some wanted more rights, some wanted independence, some wanted to join neighboring nations that shared their identity. For Austria-Hungary, this was not just political trouble, it was an existential threat. If one group broke away, others might follow. If Serbia succeeded in inspiring South Slavs inside the empire, then the empire itself could begin to crack. Vienna did not fear Serbia because Serbia was powerful enough to defeat it in a great war. Vienna feared Serbia because Serbia represented an idea that could spread. Serbia had become the symbol of South Slavic ambition. After gaining independence and expanding its influence, Serbia dreamed of uniting Slavic peoples in the Balkans, especially Serbs living under Austro-Hungarian rule. To Serbian nationalists, this was liberation. To Austria-Hungary, it was rebellion disguised as patriotism. This contrast is essential. For small nations, nationalism felt like freedom. For empires, it felt like death. The Balkans had already been shaken by war and instability before 1914. As Ottoman power retreated from southeastern Europe, new states and rival ambitions rushed into the space it left behind. Borders changed. Armies moved. Ethnic groups were divided across frontiers. Every victory created new grievances. Every defeat created new anger. The region became a place where history was never only history. It was a weapon used to justify the next claim. Young men grew up surrounded by stories of national suffering and heroic sacrifice. Secret societies formed. Revolutionary groups spoke of liberation, revenge, and martyrdom. In this atmosphere, violence could be imagined not as murder, but as duty. A pistol could become a political message. An assassination could be seen as a sacrifice for the nation. This is how men like Gavrilo Princip came to believe that killing one man could serve a greater cause. He and others did not see themselves as criminals seeking chaos. They saw themselves as young patriots striking against imperial domination. That belief did not make their actions wise, but it made them dangerous, because a person willing to die for an idea is difficult to frighten. Nationalism also poisoned the minds of governments. Leaders could not easily compromise without being accused of weakness or betrayal. Newspapers inflamed public anger. Military officers spoke of honor. Politicians feared appearing soft before their own people. Once national pride became involved, even a small crisis could become a test of dignity. And this was the deeper danger. Nationalism did not only divide people, it made humiliation unbearable. It turned disputes into moral struggles and borders into sacred lines. It convinced nations that backing down was not diplomacy, but shame. By 1914, Europe was full of governments afraid of decline and peoples hungry for recognition. Austria-Hungary feared collapse. Serbia dreamed of expansion. Russia claimed to defend the Slavs. Germany feared encirclement. France remembered humiliation. Everywhere, national pride sharpened political fear. The fuse had been laid not in one capital, but across an entire continent of wounded memories. But nationalism alone did not guarantee a world war. For that, Europe needed something even more dangerous, a network of promises that could turn one nation's crisis into everyone's war. And those promises were already waiting in the shadows of European diplomacy. As nationalism pulled Europe apart from within, its leaders tried to protect themselves from danger by building alliances. On paper, this seemed logical. If a country had powerful friends, its enemies would think twice before attacking. Alliances were meant to create balance. They were meant to make war too risky to begin. But Europe's alliances did not remove fear. They organized it. By the early 20th century, the continent had divided into rival camps. On one side stood Germany and Austria, Hungary bound together by shared interests and mutual insecurity. Germany was young, ambitious, and increasingly powerful. Austria-Hungary was older, weaker, and terrified of collapse. Each needed the other. Germany wanted a loyal partner in the center of Europe. Austria-Hungary wanted protection from Russia and support against Serbia. On the other side stood France and Russia, two very different powers joined by a common fear of Germany. France had not forgotten its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, nor the loss of Alsace-Lorraine. Russia, though vast, feared Germany's growing strength in Austria, Hungary's influence in the Balkans. Together, France and Russia created a threat Germany could never ignore: the possibility of a war on two fronts. Britain stood apart at first. It had the world's greatest navy and a vast empire, and it preferred not to tie itself too tightly to continental disputes. But Germany's rise changed British thinking. As German industry grew and its navy expanded, Britain began to worry that a single power might dominate Europe and challenge British control of the seas. Slowly, Britain moved closer to France and Russia, not because it loved them, but because it feared what Germany might become. This was the alliance trap. Every country claimed it was acting defensively. Germany supported Austria, Hungary because it feared encirclement. Russia supported Serbia because it feared losing influence and abandoning fellow Slavs. France supported Russia because it feared facing Germany alone. Britain supported balance because it feared a Europe dominated by one power. Each decision had its own logic. Together they created a disaster. The alliances were supposed to prevent war through deterrence. If every great power knew that attacking one country would bring others into the fight, then perhaps no one would risk starting a conflict. But deterrence only works when leaders believe the danger is too high. In 1914, many leaders believed the greater danger was backing down. They feared humiliation, weakness, and the loss of credibility more than escalation. A local crisis could no longer remain local. If Austria-Hungary moved against Serbia, Russia might step in. If Russia mobilized, Germany would respond. If Germany fought Russia, France would be drawn in. If Germany attacked France through Belgium, Britain might enter. One promise would activate another. One mobilization would trigger another. The system was like a row of loaded rifles, each tied to the trigger of the next. Worse still, alliances created false confidence. Austria-Hungary felt bolder because it believed Germany would stand behind it. Serbia felt less alone because it looked toward Russia. Russia believed retreat would damage its position as protector of Slavs. Germany believed delay could be fatal if France and Russia coordinated against it. Everyone felt trapped, but everyone also felt encouraged by the friends standing behind them. This made diplomacy incredibly fragile. A compromise by one country could look like betrayal to an ally. A pause could look like weakness to an enemy. Leaders were no longer deciding only for themselves. They were performing for partners, rivals, generals, newspapers, and publics who measured strength in firmness. By 1914, Europe had created a system where every nation promised to protect itself by promising to fight for someone else. What looked like security had become dependence. What looked like balance had become a mechanism for expansion. And when crisis finally came, the question would not be whether one country wanted war. The question would be how quickly every alliance would awaken. But alliances alone still needed something more dangerous to turn fear into action. Europe had not only promised to fight, it had spent years preparing the weapons, armies, and plans that would make those promises impossible to ignore. By the time Europe entered the final years before 1914, Its alliances were not empty promises. They were backed by armies, navies, factories, railways, timetables, and weapons built for a war that many leaders claimed they did not want. Every government said it was preparing for defense. Yet each act of preparation made every rival more afraid. Germany stood at the center of this fear. Since unification in 1871, it had transformed from a collection of states into an industrial giant. Its factories produced steel, chemicals, weapons, and machines at astonishing speed. Its army was admired and feared across Europe. To German leaders, this strength was proof that Germany deserved a larger place in the world. But to France, Britain, and Russia, German power looked less like ambition and more like a warning. Britain watched Germany with special concern. For generations, British security had depended on command of the seas. The Royal Navy protected trade routes, colonies, and the island itself. But when Germany began building a powerful battle fleet, Britain saw more than ships. It saw a direct challenge to the foundation of its empire. The result was a naval arms race, with both powers building larger, faster, more destructive warships. Each new battleship was celebrated at home as protection, yet interpreted abroad as threat. On land, the competition was just as dangerous. France expanded military service to strengthen its army against Germany. Russia began modernizing after humiliating defeats and internal unrest. Austria-Hungary tried to preserve its prestige despite weakness and ethnic division. Germany, fearing a future in which Russia would become too strong, believed time might not be on its side. The longer Europe waited, some German planners feared the harder victory would become. This fear gave military leaders enormous influence. Generals did not think like diplomats. Diplomats searched for compromise, delay, and negotiation. Generals thought in terms of speed, mobilization, routes, railway schedules, and first strikes. Once armies began to move, stopping them became difficult. Plans were built on precision. Trains had to leave at exact times. Reservists had to report. Horses, artillery, food, ammunition, and millions of men had to arrive at the right places before the enemy did. The most famous example was Germany's plan for a two-front war. If Germany had to fight France and Russia at the same time, it planned to defeat France quickly in the west, then turn east against slower, moving Russia. This depended on speed. Delay could ruin everything. But speed also made diplomacy dangerous. In a crisis, German leaders feared that waiting too long could allow their enemies to mobilize first. Other countries had their own fears and schedules. Russia knew its size made mobilization slow, so it wanted to begin early. France depended on Russia to pressure Germany from the east. Austria-Hungary wanted time to punish Serbia before Russia intervened. Britain wanted to preserve balance without committing too soon. Each power believed its plan was reasonable together. Those plans created a system where hesitation looked fatal. There was also a dangerous cultural belief spreading through Europe that war, if it came, would be short, heroic, and cleansing. Many officers imagined cavalry charges, flags, honor, and decisive battles. Politicians believed a firm military response might solve problems that diplomacy had failed to settle. Newspapers glorified strength. Crowds cheered uniforms. Young men were taught that service proved courage and manhood. Almost no one imagined the reality clearly enough. Trenches stretching across continents, machine guns cutting down waves of soldiers, artillery turning fields into wastelands, poison gas drifting through mud, and entire generations buried beneath names on memorials. This was the cruel contrast. Europe armed itself in the name of safety, but every new weapon made peace more fragile. It built armies to prevent humiliation, but those armies created pressure to act before it was too late. It trusted military plans to provide control, but those plans would soon control the leaders who had approved them. By 1914, Europe had not simply stumbled toward war. It had prepared the tools, trained the men, written the schedules, and imagined the glory. All it needed now was an event powerful enough to activate everything waiting beneath the surface for one final fatal spark. All the fear, pride, alliances, and military planning in Europe still needed one event to bring them to life. That event came on the 28th of June, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. Bosnia had once belonged to the Ottoman Empire, but Austria-Hungary had taken control of it, angering many South Slavs who believed Bosnia should not be ruled from Vienna. To Serbian nationalists, Bosnia was not just a province. It was part of a larger dream, a united Slavic homeland free from imperial control. And when Austria-Hungary's heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, decided to visit Sarajevo, some young nationalists saw an opportunity. Franz Ferdinand was not the most beloved figure in the empire, but he was important. He represented the future of Austria-Hungary. His visit to Bosnia was meant to show imperial authority, confidence, and control. But to those who hated Austro-Hungarian rule, his presence felt like an insult. It was a symbol of empire driving through a city filled with resentment. Among those waiting for him was Gavrilo Princip, a young Bosnian Serb nationalist connected to a revolutionary movement that wanted South Slavs freed from Austrian rule. He and other conspirators were not powerful men. They did not command armies. They did not control governments. But they believed one dramatic act could shake an empire. That morning, Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, traveled through Sarajevo in an open car. The route was public. Security was weak. The conspirators waited along the road, armed with pistols and bombs. The first attempts failed. One assassin lost his nerve. Another threw a bomb, but it bounced off the Archduke's car and exploded beneath the vehicle behind him, injuring several people but leaving Franz Ferdinand alive. For a moment, history seemed to turn away from disaster. The Archduke continued to the town hall, angry but unharmed. Officials tried to continue the visit as if order had survived, but the day had already been poisoned by violence. Franz Ferdinand decided to visit the wounded from the bombing attempt at the hospital. It was a human decision, perhaps even a compassionate one. Yet it required a change en route, and that change was not properly communicated to the driver. As the car moved through Sarajevo again, it took a wrong turn. By chance, it stopped near Gavrilo Princip, who had believed the assassination attempt had failed. Suddenly, the man he had come to kill was directly in front of him. Princip stepped forward, raised his pistol, and fired. The bullets struck Franz Ferdinand and Sophie. Within minutes, both were dying. Sophie, who had joined her husband despite the dangers of the visit, collapsed beside him. Franz Ferdinand's final concern was reportedly for her, not himself. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne was dead, his wife was dead, and the empire had been humiliated in a city it claimed to control. At first, the assassination was shocking, but it did not automatically mean world war. Political murders had happened before in Europe. Crises had been survived before. Diplomats had found ways to step back before. If Sarajevo had happened in a calmer continent, it might have remained a regional tragedy, a dark moment between Austria, Hungary, and Serbia, but Europe in 1914 was not calm. The assassination landed inside a system already filled with suspicion. Austria-Hungary did not see only a murdered archduke. It saw Serbian nationalism threatening the survival of the empire. Germany did not see only an ally in mourning. It saw a chance to stand firm before Russia grew stronger. Russia did not see only a Balkan dispute. It saw its role as protector of Slavs being tested. Every power looked at Sarajevo and saw its own fear reflected back. This is why the assassination mattered so much. The gunshots did not create the deeper causes of World War I. They exposed them. They struck the one place where nationalism, imperial weakness, alliance politics, and military planning all met. One bullet did not kill millions by itself, but it lit the fuse of a continent already prepared to burn. After Sarajevo, Austria-Hungary stood at a crossroads. It could treat the assassination as a criminal conspiracy, investigate it, and punish those directly involved, or it could use the murder of Franz Ferdinand as the moment to finally break Serbia's power. In Vienna, grief quickly mixed with fear, and fear hardened into revenge. The empire's leaders did not see Serbia as a normal neighbor. They saw it as a disease spreading through the Balkans, infecting Slavic peoples inside Austria, Hungary with dreams of independence. The assassination seemed to confirm everything they already feared. If Serbia was not crushed now, they believed, then more rebellions, more assassinations, and more nationalist movements would follow. The survival of the empire appeared to be at stake, but Austria-Hungary had a problem. Serbia was backed by the sympathy of Russia, and Russia was far larger than Austria. Hungary, a war against Serbia, could easily become a confrontation with the Russian Empire, so before Vienna moved, it looked to Berlin. Germany, fearing the decline of its only reliable ally and wanting to show strength, offered Austria-Hungary what became known as the blank cheque, support even if the crisis widened. This was one of the most dangerous promises in modern history. It did not force Austria-Hungary to choose war, but it made war easier to choose. With Germany standing behind it, Vienna felt less alone, less cautious, and more willing to take a risk. What might have been a restrained response became a test of power. Austria-Hungary then prepared an ultimatum for Serbia. On the surface, it was a demand for justice. In reality, it was designed to be almost impossible for a sovereign country to accept completely. Serbia was ordered to suppress anti-Austrian propaganda, punish nationalist groups, dismiss officials Austria considered hostile, and allow Austro-Hungarian participation in investigations inside Serbia itself. That final demand struck at Serbia's independence. To accept everything would make Serbia look less like a nation and more like a state under Austrian supervision. Yet, Serbia knew the danger of refusal. Its government responded carefully, accepting most of the demands and offering compromise on others. By ordinary diplomatic standards, Serbia's reply was surprisingly conciliatory. But Austria-Hungary was not searching for ordinary diplomacy. The empire had already decided that Serbia must be punished. The ultimatum had been written less as a bridge to peace than as a road to war. When Serbia refused to accept every condition without limit, Austria-Hungary treated the response as rejection. On the 28th of July, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. At that moment, the crisis crossed a line. What had begun as a murder investigation became an interstate war. Austrian guns soon opened fire on Belgrade, and the sound of artillery carried far beyond the Balkans. It was no longer a question of one dead archduke. It was now a question of prestige, alliance loyalty, and whether great powers would allow their friends to be humiliated. The tragedy was that Austria-Hungary believed it was acting before weakness destroyed it. Its leaders thought a quick victory over Serbia would restore authority and frighten nationalist movements into silence. Instead, they awakened the very forces that would help destroy the empire. In trying to prove strength, Vienna exposed its fragility. This is the pattern that made 1914 so deadly. Every leader believed the next step was necessary. Austria-Hungary believed it needed revenge to survive. Germany believed it needed to support Austria to avoid isolation. Serbia believed it needed to protect its sovereignty. Russia believed it could not abandon Serbia without losing honor and influence. Each decision had logic inside it. Together they formed madness. Austria-Hungary's fatal decision was not simply declaring war on Serbia. It was believing that a local punishment could remain local in a continent chained together by alliances, pride, and fear. Once Vienna chose war, the crisis no longer belonged to Vienna alone. And because every capital was watching every other capital, the first shot created pressure everywhere. No ruler wanted to be the one who hesitated. No government wanted to look weak before allies, enemies, or its own people. Europe entered the hour when fear would outrun political judgment everywhere. The dominoes were ready to fall. Once Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, the crisis stopped being a Balkan dispute. It became a test for every promise Europe had made in the years before 1914. The alliances that had once looked like shields now began to behave like chains. Each government watched the next, trying to guess whether hesitation would bring safety or humiliation. Russia moved first toward escalation. To the Russian Empire, Serbia was more than a small Balkan state. It was a Slavic nation, a symbol of Russian influence, and a place where Russia could not afford another embarrassment. Only a few years earlier, Russia had been forced to back down during earlier Balkan crises. If it abandoned Serbia again, its leaders feared Russia would look weak before its allies, its enemies, and its own people. So Russia began mobilizing. To Russian leaders, mobilization was a warning and a preparation. To Germany, it looked like the first step toward attack. This was the deadly logic of 1914. One nation's defensive measure became another nation's proof of danger. Germany had long feared a war on two fronts, trapped between Russia in the east and France in the west. Once Russia began moving, German planners believed delay could be fatal. Germany then faced its own terrifying choice. If it waited, Russia's massive army might become ready. If it struck quickly, it might defeat France before Russia could fully mobilize. This was the logic behind Germany's war planning. The plan demanded speed. It gave diplomacy very little room to breathe. Once the trains began moving, the generals believed the nation had to follow. Germany declared war on Russia. But fighting Russia meant facing France too, because France was Russia's ally. Germany then declared war on France and put its Western plan into motion. The route to Paris, however, ran through Belgium, a neutral country whose independence had been guaranteed by international agreement. Germany treated Belgian neutrality as an obstacle that military necessity could not respect. For Britain, this changed everything. Britain had hesitated. It did not want to be dragged automatically into a continental war, but a Germany that invaded Belgium and threatened to dominate France and the Channel coast was a danger Britain could not ignore. British leaders saw Belgian neutrality as both a legal obligation and a strategic line. If Germany controlled Belgium, the balance of Europe would be broken. So Britain entered the war, and with that, what had begun as Austria-Hungary against Serbia had become a conflict involving the great powers of Europe. Austria-Hungary fought Serbia. Russia stood against Austria and Germany. Germany fought Russia and France. Britain joined against Germany. Soon, colonies, dominions, and overseas empires would be pulled in as well, turning a European crisis into a global war. The most tragic part was that almost every government claimed it was acting defensively. Austria-Hungary said it was defending itself from Serbian terrorism. Serbia said it was defending its sovereignty. Russia said it was defending Serbia and its honor. Germany said it was defending itself from encirclement. France said it was defending itself from German aggression. Britain said it was defending Belgium and the balance of power. Everyone claimed necessity. Everyone saw danger. Everyone believed the next move was forced. But the result was catastrophe. The dominoes did not fall because leaders were mindless. They fell because each leader saw only the danger of stopping, not the danger of continuing. No one wanted to appear weak. No one wanted to betray an ally. No one wanted to mobilize too late. No one wanted to be blamed for national humiliation. In that atmosphere, peace required patience, trust, and courage. War required only momentum. By early August 1914, the machine was moving too quickly to stop. Railway stations filled with soldiers. Crowds cheered in city streets. Newspapers announced declarations of war, as if history itself had become unavoidable. Many believed the fighting would be short, decisive, and glorious. They were wrong. Across the continent, confidence was marching toward trenches, graves, and a century permanently scarred by human political miscalculation. The chain reaction had begun, and Europe was about to discover that the war it had prepared for was not the war it would actually fight. By the time the armies began to move in August 1914, the assassination in Sarajevo had almost disappeared behind something much larger. Franz Ferdinand's death had mattered, but it was no longer the center of the story. The war had grown beyond one murdered archduke, beyond one angry empire, beyond one small Balkan state. It had become the result of an entire system built to turn fear into action and action into catastrophe. The real reason World War I started was not simple. It was not only nationalism. It was not only alliances. It was not only militarism, empire, assassination, or pride. It was all of them working together, each one making the others more dangerous. Nationalism gave people powerful dreams and dangerous resentments. It convinced small nations that freedom was worth blood, and convinced old empires that compromise could mean death. In Serbia, nationalism inspired resistance. In Austria-Hungary, it created panic. In Russia, it became a reason to defend Slavs. In France, it kept alive the memory of lost territory. In Germany, it fed the belief that a rising power deserved respect. Everywhere, national pride made humiliation feel unbearable. Imperial fear made the situation worse. The great powers did not simply want more territory. They feared losing what they already had. Britain feared losing naval dominance. Germany feared being surrounded. Austria-Hungary feared internal collapse. Russia feared another humiliation in the Balkans. France feared standing alone against German power. Each country believed it was defending its future, but each defense looked like a threat to someone else. Then came the alliances. They were supposed to make Europe safer by frightening countries away from war. Instead, they created a continent where no crisis could stay small. Austria-Hungary could act against Serbia because Germany stood behind it. Serbia could resist because Russia might support it. Russia could move because France was its ally. Germany could not ignore Russia because France stood in the West. Britain could not ignore Belgium because German expansion threatened the balance of power. The alliances did not cause the spark, but they spread the fire. Militarism gave the fire its machinery. Armies were not only ready, they were planned in advance. Generals had schedules, railways had timetables, mobilization had procedures. Once one army moved, another had to move quickly or risk falling behind. Military planning turned political tension into a race against time. Diplomacy needed patience, but the war plans demanded speed. This was one of the greatest tragedies of 1914. Europe's leaders had created systems they could not fully control. They believed they were making rational decisions, but each decision narrowed the next one. Support your ally. Protect your honor. Mobilize before the enemy. Strike before it is too late. Do not appear weak. Do not lose face. Do not hesitate. Step by step, choice became momentum. And yet the war was not truly inevitable. That is what makes it so haunting. At many moments, leaders could have slowed down. Austria-Hungary could have accepted Serbia's partial concessions. Germany could have restrained Vienna. Russia could have delayed mobilization. Germany could have avoided invading Belgium. Britain might have stayed out if the balance of power had not been threatened. There were exits along the road, but every exit required someone to accept risk, embarrassment, or political defeat. In 1914, the courage to step back was rarer than the willingness to move forward. Leaders feared peace would make them look weak. They feared compromise would invite future danger. They feared delay would give enemies an advantage. So they chose firmness, and every act of firmness made the crisis harder to stop. That is the real reason World War I began. Europe had built a machine out of fear, pride, alliances, empires, armies, and nationalist dreams. The assassination in Sarajevo pulled the lever, but the machine had been assembled long before. And once it started moving, the men who thought they controlled it discovered the terrible truth. They had not built a weapon they could command. They had built a chain reaction. World War I did not begin because one man fired a pistol in Sarajevo. It began because that pistol was fired into a continent already filled with fear, pride, rivalry, and suspicion. The assassination mattered because Europe had spent decades building the conditions that made restraint feel dangerous and escalation feel necessary. Each leader believed the next step would protect his nation. Austria-Hungary wanted revenge. Germany wanted loyalty and strength. Russia wanted honor and influence. France wanted security. Britain wanted balance. But together, their choices turned protection into destruction. That is the tragedy of 1914. The war was not caused by fate alone. It was caused by human decisions made inside a system that rewarded speed, pride, and fear more than patience. By the time the armies marched, the chain reaction had become unstoppable, and the world that entered that summer full of confidence would never return unchanged.